We are this close to starting the twin turbo Vette for the very first time. After we hit the salvage auction jackpot on the C6 Corvette, which unbeknownst to me when I bought it, came with a $30,000 Steve Morris built 427 cubic inch engine, we decided to see exactly how much punishment said engine can take. So we built ourselves a ridiculous twin turbo kit with an ultimate goal of 1,500 horsepower. But without all this stuff, all that's just for show. So now it's time to get this thing wired up and brought back to life. Oh, and as a added bonus, we get the pleasure of undoing just a phenomenal amount of hackery, which is all part of the fun, I guess. This car is trashed. I mean, it is genuinely trashed. But as frustrating as it is to have to cut all this stuff out of here and try to repair what's left of the wiring in this car, if you've ever had to unhack somebody's mess like this, you know it's also very, very satisfying.
It is very satisfying to get rid of what is all of it.
Garbage.
It's kind of a miracle this thing didn't have an electrical fire.
Yeah, burned down, just not in the way that any of this would lead you to believe. There's a whole mess of audio stuff over there on the passenger side. We had a radar detector system. This was all tucked behind the dashboard. This is for the aftermarket radio to make the steering wheel controls work. We got wires, we got vacuum lines, we got modules. There is no reasonable place to start with this. So Tim's just yanking stuff, and whatever comes tight, I'm cutting. That is part of the gauge system, I believe. Yank out.
Got it. Oh, wow.
That's basically how this is gonna work.
So, what is this?
This is simply meant to go down into a fuse box and allow you to add an extra fused accessory. You're not supposed to do whatever this was.
The great words of Bill Dance, don't do that.
This is the horn for our radar detector. It may have also been an alarm. I don't know at this point. Realistically, given all of this, there's really only one option here. Yeah, sometimes it's just so bad you have to rip everything out and start from scratch, and I'm really glad we did go this route because, surprise, surprise, we found even more just not good news. There is one carpet. This is our main carpet. It came from the factory. And then they have put an absurd amount of sound deadening in this car. And just in case all that wasn't enough, they decided to stick this Dynamat material over every inch of the cockpit. We might as well nickname the car Apollo at this point because it looks like a freaking space shuttle in here. And unlike the last stuff where we could just pull out, there's really no easy way to get it off. It's some of the nastiest stuff I've ever worked with. Heat doesn't work. Maybe we'll try dry ice. I don't know. We're gonna have to get it off because it's all just disgusting and really, really heavy. But there is one thing that might be even more impressive than the amount of sound deadening they had in the car, and that's the amount of just random, unused trash wiring that was in it. Half this stuff wasn't even connected to anything. It was either old or damaged. We also stripped out all this, but at least that was for the radar detector system. We had the alcohol injection kit, and then we had this AEM failsafe gauge. But that aside, now that we got the car properly stripped down, we can get to building it up the right way. Specifically, getting the brains of this whole operation installed in the form of our Holley Dominator ECU.
It feels sticky?
Yeah, this is gonna be nasty. I sat down in here to kind of go over what we're doing with the whole ECU thing, and I am stuck to the car. I don't even want to imagine how hard it's going to be to get up off this thing. Anyway, the Holley Dominator is the same thing we ran into the trucks, the same thing Fernando ran in his 350Z. There's such a ridiculous amount of room back here since we gutted behind the dashboard. We should be able to mount the ECU here and still have plenty of room for the rest of our electronics. I didn't at all expect this to be the case, but being that we gutted the whole back of the dash, we somehow have more room to work with in this tiny Corvette than we did in the truck. We had enough room back here to build ourselves this nice big dinner tray looking ECU mount. We also mounted our MSD 4-channel relay box. This is going to control our engine water pump, our intercooler pump, the cooling fans, and then we have one spare. We've also got all this room to do, well, whatever we want with. When you're building a car like this, leaving room for future electronics and just giving yourself room to grow in the car as you develop it is one of the biggest favors you can do yourself. That way you don't find yourself having to go back and re-engineer stuff. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. Maybe we'll use this area for more relays for nitrous in case we decide 1500 horsepower ain't enough.
I support that.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, well then, why not, right?
Of course.
But for now, we got our ECU in place. We can start going around the car, wiring everything up to it. That's impossible. I'm off to a banging start here.
That looks fun.
Yes, they ran, I do just have to give them so much credit here. They ran this stupid Dynamat over top of the wiring. All right, Big Tim's got us pointed in the right direction here. He just went and wired up all of our accessories first, meaning now instead of powering our fuel pump and our heat exchanger pump with a Milwaukee battery, we can do it via the Holley Dominator ECU. All these relays, they grab power from this jump post back here, then each and every one of them can be turned on individually based on whatever parameters we want from the Holley Dominator. We could say, command our radiator fans to turn on at exactly 142 degrees Fahrenheit. We can also say, command our fuel pumps to only run at half speed under, I don't know, let's call it 8 pounds of boost. I know on its own, a lot of that stuff might seem trivial, but having that flexibility, it's gonna come in handy in ways that we can't even imagine yet when we get out racing this car. And thanks to Tim's thoughtful wiring, we're already heavily future-proofed.
Yep, I overspec'd all the wiring for essentially any type of upgrade we may need to do in the future without having to run heavier gauge wire.
The next thing we have to cross off the wiring checklist is our charging system, our main power cables. Now, Chevy already did us a solid mounted the battery in the trunk of the Corvettes, so we used the stock battery cable to run all the way up here to the fuse box. We've already made ourselves a nice cable that runs from that junction box we mounted next to the ECU to the engine bay fuse box, which means the last piece of the puzzle is to make ourselves a nice heavy gauge wire that goes from the fuse box down to the starter. And then to make sure we can charge, we'll run another wire from our starter right up to our alternator. Let me clarify, we would do that if we had an alternator. The way we designed this build, we've got rid of almost every bit of the accessory drive. There's no AC, the power steering, that's now in the back. We don't even have a water pump, but unfortunately there's no getting around the fact that we do need to run an alternator and it needs to run off this crank pulley. The alternators on C6 Corvettes are mounted high up off the front of the driver's side cylinder head. Well, that is now where our exhaust goes, so that isn't really gonna work. The next most obvious place would be to simply lower the alternator down and mount it off the driver's side engine block, sort of like they do on F-body Camaros, but that isn't gonna work in a C6 Corvette, being that our steering rack's right there. Okay, no problem, let's move it over onto the passenger side. Well, we have another exhaust there, so that's not gonna work, which pretty much means our only option is down low on the passenger side. And well, lucky for us, our friends at ICT Billet make a set of brackets to do exactly that. Going into this, I was 100% positive that we were gonna have to build our own alternator bracket and tensioner system, and I know that doesn't sound that complex compared to, building a turbo kit, but if you get that pulley alignment wrong, meaning the alternator sits even a half millimeter in front of the crank pulley, it leads to all kind of disaster at high RPM. You'll shred belts, you'll throw belts, it's just not a good time. Luckily, ICT has done the hard work for us. The only thing that's left to do on our end is a little minor clearancing of the engine block. We ended up having to cut far more off this block than I originally anticipated. Got it done. Now, just for reference, it does turn out that on all the factory LS blocks, we wouldn't have had to do any of that grinding. That mounting ball sits right about there and it's simply non-existent. I decided to bring this thing up here on the old 7-liter test block and it fits perfectly fine from the jump, though I suppose a little bit of grind is not such a bad price given that we lucked out on that whole LSX deal. And now that we got our bracket situated, we can get on with installing our alternator, which unfortunately is not going to be the sick MechMan unit that we found on the car when we got it from the auction, the C6 alternators. I know they look similar to every other LS alternator, but the mounting holes are spaced apart just a bit wider than most of the other LS alternators. Our kit from ICT, it was designed around the LS1 style alternator, so we picked up this single wire unit from PowerMaster. I think it should do us just fine. As you'd expect, alternator bolts right up. Now the only missing piece of this puzzle is a belt. The alternator swings back and forth on this bracket to allow you to tension it, but this isn't exactly an off-the-shelf application. So as far as the belt goes, we got to figure that out on our own. Now to figure out what size belt we need, we're going to use the old string trick. Well, in this case, it's a very small gauge wire. We don't have any string, but it should work all the same. We're going to wrap it around our crank pulley. Then we'll stretch it tight in the same route that our belt's going to run. And if we did this right, then this is exactly how long our belt needs to be. Just take that measurement to the parts store, get a corresponding belt, and again, keyword being, if we did this right, we'll have a belt that works. Oh yeah, there we go. Now the one downside to running a setup like this is we no longer have a spring type tensioner like you'd see on most cars to keep the belt tight. So we're gonna have to tension it ourselves with a pry bar. That's too loose. Flip this around, go a little harder with it. That feels about right. And we'll keep that tension on it and lock it down with a wrench. What do you think? She ain't going nowhere?
Perfect.
And after quite the detour there, we can make our final power cable and check the charging system off the list, which means we can move on to the next part of the electrical system, the ignition. And this one is, yeah, it's gonna be a problem. Now, under normal circumstances, the ignition system on an LS car, it is a complete and utter non-issue. You'd simply take your coil pack, mount her right about there, and run a spark plug wire from the end of the coil pack to the spark plug wire. Done.
I think you got a problem there.
Yeah, we have decided to make this incredibly hard on ourselves. But to be fair, it was for a big set of turbos, so I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? We maybe, possibly, could get it to work over here, though since our headers face up, it'd be really tricky to be able to run our spark plug wire from the coil down to the plug without hitting the header. But same as the alternator, ICT Billet makes a cool solution that allows us to stack 4 coil packs together and remote mount them. While this does give us 2 nice compact units that'll allow for a lot more flexibility when it comes to mounting, it doesn't quite solve all our issues because this engine bay is tight. There's not really a great place to mount these. The entire driver's side, that's kind of off limits. The front, that doesn't really work. The only place that it seems like we might have a shot is somewhere down in here, but even that, it is tight. Now I think our best shot at making this work is going to be some variation of having both sets of 4 coils stuck together back to back, but as per usual, I still think it's going to need just a bit of modification. We got our nice compact coil pack cluster here, and as I was playing around down in this corner, I found a bracket, and this, formerly at least, sat right about there, and it was kind of the hub where all the different connectors from our main wiring harness mounted. But given that most of those connectors, you know, no longer exist, I'm thinking we cut it up to mount our coil packs. Well, I'm not going to pretend it's the prettiest thing in the world, but it'll definitely work, and our coils, they should be real nice and happy over here, away from any real major heat source. And our spark plug wires now, we're going to be able to run them straight from our coil packs down under the exhaust manifolds on both sides. The one and only downside about the way we chose to do this is we can't just go online and order spark plug wires anymore. We're going to have to make them.
So making plug wires, shockingly simple.
Wow. Nice.
Cut that guy.
That's a satisfying sound.
There.
Very.
We don't need that. Fold that guy over. Slide your plug end, so this is the end that actually goes onto the spark plug.
The 90 degree.
Yes. Silicone.
So you lube her up.
Lube her up.
And then stick it in.
Stick it in.
Right into that ceramic end. With these driver's side wires, I think our best option to run them over to the passenger side coil mounting area is right up through the cowl, which it turns out we're using a lot throughout this build.
Very convenient.
It's the answer for everything. Run it through the cowl. And then we're going to come right out here, same place we ran our fuel lines into the car. Boom. With our coil setup knocked out, that leaves us with only one singular wiring project we need to check off the list before we're ready to start it, and it's the engine harness, of which Holley gives us a fantastic starting point, but it's important to remember, it is just that, it's a starting point. This is our universal V8 or LS harness, but it doesn't necessarily apply to every feature that every LS engine has. A universal engine harness like this, it's meant to get you as close as possible straight out of the box to having a working engine harness, but it's a inevitability that you're gonna have to de-universalize it, I guess is the word, just a little bit, or in our case, a lot. For example, this wiring harness that's made for a drive-by-cable style throttle body, where we need to integrate this for our drive-by-wire throttle system. And then there's the fact that while it does have a fuel pressure sensor and a IAT sensor already wired in, they're not necessarily going to go where we've mounted our sensors. So while this does save us from building a harness from scratch, we've still got plenty of work to do. Tim's getting started on our wiring harness, we have to install a few remaining sensors, or else we're not going to make it very far with that wiring harness.
Oh.
Just a little water. Just
A
a
little?
little water.
Wow.
Fernando, would you grab a cap, please?
No cat. Wow.
Perfect fit. Seamless. Holley has given us the perfect location to mount some of these sensors in the back of the intake manifold.
Sir, that was so...
You know, just 1 second while we drain our intake manifold, which is definitely the first time I've ever been able to say that. Yeah, that's about right. More or less how this is gonna work out is this top hole is gonna be our IAT sensor, which measures the temperature of the air going into the engine. This smaller hole right below it, that's gonna be our MAP sensor, which measures the pressure of the air going into the engine, AKA boost. And then that last little hole down there, we're gonna save that one as kind of a flex space. But just as been the case for almost everything we've done to this car at this point, we need to sacrifice just a little more of our firewall to make the sensors fit back here. Part of me wishes I could say that this is the last time we're gonna have to cut material out of the firewall, but given that would be like the 5th time in this series that I've said that, it's probably not a wise statement to make. Sensors, check. We also use that spare line to run a brake booster hose, and while we're in here, we tap the front of the manifold to give us our ports to get vacuum to our blow-off valve and our fuel pressure regulator. Just to be clear, we're not actually going to run it that way.
No.
Like, we're going to go through the firewall.
We're going to go through the
firewall. Yeah.
So this is injectors. Perfect location, dead center. That's going to Y out to both sides. Then oil pressure. That needs to go all the way down here. Fuel pressure? I was expecting to have to extend this one, but I don't think we do. Cam.
Which is the furthest one away. The cam is way down there, that tan sensor. That looks good.
That's going to reach. And there's another one that I cut up over here. Coolant temp. Also way too long, because that's going to go right here. Map.
Also
which
too
is
long now.
Right there. And ignition.
Which we now have to bring all the way over here. Fast forward a couple hours of Tim making some wires shorter, a few more longer, and we've got an engine harness that's tailored fit just for us. Meaning we can route it through the firewall, plug it into our Holley Dominator, and check the engine harness officially off the list. Come on, baby, last one. Oh yeah, there we go. Now that we got the engine harness done, we can start rebuilding this thing and putting in our interior. There we go. It is incredible how easy things go together when there's no HVAC behind the dashboard. It almost doesn't do it justice on camera, but there is so much room back there. We have a lot of room to do basically whatever we want behind the dash.
I think that what you're trying to explain is you're going to put a bottle of NASA right there,
I might
right?
put a bottle there. It might not be nitrous. But if we do CO2 for boost control, that's not a bad spot. The next piece of our electronics puzzle here is our fancy Holley Pro Dash gauge cluster. And unlike the truck where we just kind of crudely mounted it to the steering column cover, this time we get to mount it much more elegantly thanks to this bezel that's made specifically for putting this gauge display into a C6 Corvette by Reversion Raceworks. On a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfying?
20.
The only thing we need to add to make our cluster work is our GPS speedometer antenna. Yeah, that'll work. Tucked up behind the mirror real nice. Then, assuming we don't have the GPS antenna wire sticking out the front of it, we can stick her in. That is freaking slick. Slick. Now that we have it in there, right? Slick.
Turn it on.
Whoa, hold on now. We got a little more work to do before we can turn it on. I've found in the past that it's generally not an awesome idea to start your engine for the first time with 2 gaping holes left open in the oiling system. From the factory, there's a huge brick that hangs off the side of here that tries to use the engine's coolant to cool the oil, though in some cases it can end up acting more like an oil heater. And while considering that we've eradicated most of the factory cooling system, that's not really going to work for us anymore. So we are going to throw on this improved racing oil cooler block and put a true oil cooler on it. This block actually has a 180-degree thermostat in it too, meaning that before our oil temperatures get up to 180 degrees, only a very small portion of oil is passing through this. The whole idea is that we won't be over cooling the oil, and it'll make sure that we can get it up to temp as fast as we want if we've been, sitting in the pits for 2 hours at the track. They also had the wherewithal to predict that people like me were going to want to put oil pressure sensors and whatnot here. They put a 1/8 MPT bung in the side of it, and we are going to do exactly that. We're going to stick our 100 PSI oil pressure sensor right in that hole. As for the other end of our oil cooler system, we're going to go with this guy, a big, meaty Cetrab unit. And given everything else we have going on over here, our pump, all our front coolers, and our ground clearance need, we've kind of decided the best bet for mounting is right here, cocked 45 degrees. Yeah, end of the day, that's what our oil cooler should look like, roughly. And to mount our oil cooler, it's back to the scrap heap. These are version 1.0, I guess we'll call it, of the fuel cell mounting straps off the Demon truck. Unfortunately, they just weren't quite thick enough, if you know what I mean. They were sagging a little bit, so we're gonna
Repurpose them.
indeed.
Plan is a couple bends here and there, mounted to our bumper support beam, and chop her up a little bit.
399 brackets, just how we like it. With any luck, this oil cooler will show right through the bumper, just like Tim's face did. Oh yeah, perfect, exactly how we wanted it. You can't see the top, you can, well, barely see the sides. We'll take it, not bad. With that wrapped up, that brings us to issue number 2, which actually might be more critical than the whole oil cooler situation, in that we don't have a clutch or a flywheel in it.
Is that the right size? Close enough.
Close enough. Tim's tech tip of the day, close enough. I do have to admit, it is freaking awesome to have built a race car where this whole drivetrain comes out in, what was this, 15 minutes? An honest 15 minutes, Tim?
An honest 15 minutes?
Yeah. Not an exaggerated 15, an honest 15. Yep, there you go.
Are we out?
Almost. Right there. I'm out.
Down?
Down. Incredible. You know, I'm not going to say we don't trust this wooden rig we just sat the transmission and drivetrain down on, but just because, you know, it's safety first here. You know that whole saying about good things taking time? Well, I can't think of a time it has been more true than right now. From the jump, we knew it was going to be tough trying to find a clutch that would hold up to the thrashing we're about to give this Vette. So a while back, we contacted our friends at Mantic Clutch USA and had them start building the biggest, baddest clutch they possibly could. This is their quad disc clutch kit for the C6, and as the word quad would imply, it has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 total clutch discs. One thing I constantly feel the need to compliment Mantic on is the fact that these multi-plate clutch discs are still super easy to install. The way they designed this whole deal is it's just a normal bolt, but the back of this flywheel, it has a recessed groove cut into it. It locks the head of the bolt in place, so once you pull it tight, none of this is going anywhere. It's a really clever, albeit simple way to design this. I will say though, it helps significantly if you have somebody bringing you the discs in the perfect order like Tim is right now. All we have to do, the only bit of attention this requires at all, is making sure this black Sharpied line there is going in the right direction. They all got to be lined up because the clutch assembly itself is balanced based on that. Ready? Uno, dos, tres. Come on, baby, come on. Oh yeah, there we go. And we're in, I think, all the way. Sick, that was way easier than it was on the Demon. What a beauty. What a freaking beauty. So the final thing we need to do before we can slap that whole drivetrain back in the car and hopefully make some noise in the Vette is install our slave cylinder. But because that clutch is so freaking big, we instead need to swap out to this guy, a much smaller slave cylinder made by Tick. These Tick slave cylinders are freaking awesome, but they do have one small downside. They're not specifically made for a C6 Corvette. They're just T56 slave cylinders, which means we're gonna run into that issue right there. So we're gonna have to, well, you know what we're gonna have to do. Oh yeah, plenty of clearance now. So we got her to fit real nice, but because this isn't a stock slave cylinder and a stock clutch, we can't just slap this thing in all willy-nilly and hope for the best. We gotta do a little quick math to make sure everything's gonna work properly once we bolt everything together. What Tick and Manic want from us is to make sure once we have this all bolted up, not only is there no space between our throwout bearing and the fingers on the pressure plate, but that there's a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch preload. On the clutch side of things, the distance between the pressure plate and the bell housing after we adjust for the thickness of our straight edge is 2.305 inches. Then on the torque tube side of things, after we again adjust for our straight edge, we've got 2.293 inches. What we'll do is take our biggest spacer here, add another one to it, which fortunately is not quite big enough. But if we add one more here, I suspect this is gonna give us, yeah, pretty much exactly what we need, a 1/2 inch. That is gonna put us right at about 5/8 of an inch. Sounds good to me. It seems we have made a miscalculation. Not on the whole spacing thing, not on that measurement, it's perfectly fine, but it turns out since we did have to space it out so much, we didn't at all have to cut this torque tube. However, that is gonna push those fittings on the slave cylinder up here to the bell housing side of things, which means we did have to cut this. Nice, missed it by that much, which in this case, ironically, is by quite a bit. Now is where we start getting, you know, just a little bit nervous. All right, up with it. Because if all goes well here, we stick this thing back in here, press a couple wires together, and this thing starts for the first time.
You mean crank or actually start?
Starts.
Wow.
All right, see if you can come forward. Oh, we are close. It went in most of the discs.
What?
Yeah, we probably have one more disc or maybe just the pilot bearing. It just
What?
right in. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what happens when you lube it up real good, and
Yeah.
we thank Tim for that one. Oh, did we just go? Oh, we're in. We are in. All right, let's bolt this together and fire
easy.
up. It was easy. Way too easy for 4 discs. Just the final touches, you know? There's a lot that's scary here. One, it's a completely new setup. Every system in this car, it's brand new. We made it. That's scary in itself. And then there's the fact that we never heard this engine run. It seems like everything should be fine. We've been very thorough. We've done everything the right way. But you never know. You just never know. So the way we're going to have to start this is a bit odd. This engine start button is CAN-based. It's a pain to try to make work with aftermarket engine management like this. So effectively, our stock start button is just going to power the body. It's up to us to start the engine. The very last thing we need to do is calibrate our throttle body by pressing the pedal down all the way once, letting off slowly, all the way down again, letting off slowly again. It was successful. We're ready to roll. We haven't done it yet, but eventually we're gonna try to put a digital switch on our Holley dash screen and use that as a start button so we don't have to put a physical switch. But for now, just temporarily, we're gonna do it Acme style. You ready?
Yeah.
You ready, Fernando?
No.
Come on, have some confidence.
No.
Not really ready either. Let's go for it. Spicy. Yeah, we don't have nearly enough fuel pressure.
How many fuel pressures do we need?
We have 27 pressures. Again. Hold. Every time he cranks it, we can see exactly how much fuel pressure it has. We're up at 40. We want a little more than that. Let's see, it should be about there. One more. All right, that'll do. Okay. Lock her down. We'll see if that was our issue. Of which, of course, there could be many. Probably move my head back a little. You killed it, Tim!
Come on.
Man. Sweet!
I did.
What is that?
Oil. Oh, we got a lick. We're fine. The first lick.
Still runs. It counts. It still runs, all right? Now we gotta make sure it stays running.
No leaks. If you've never used an airlift before, you hook up compressed air, it pulls a vacuum on the cooling system, you check for leaks, and then it replaces that vacuum with coolant.
And with the cooling system full, we had Rick from Big 3 hop back into the Holly remotely and get our idle dialed in, which of course let us run the car long enough to realize we had a huge cooling system issue when we started puking coolant out of the overflow. I don't believe that the water pump is running.
Sounds good.
Okay. So we're not getting power.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fat white wire coming in.
All right, so you want to make sure our pinout's correct?
Engine water pump should be connector J2B, pin B5, which is output number 9.
That is engine water pump?
Yes.
Well, it's on B21, output number 8 here.
That's nowhere even.
Okay. Well, that explains our issue right there.
That's right.
There we go. There's a working water pump. All right, let's try this again. I don't even know how to feel about this. I don't think there's ever been a first start on a full fresh build that has went like this. This is unfreaking real.
It's pretty impressive. Very few things to troubleshoot. Runs great. Sounds great.
Of course, we do still have plenty of work to do before we can actually drive this thing or put it on the dyno. We have all kinds of small little leaks. It looks like this radiator cap fitting's kind of seeping a little bit. We have to run the vacuum hoses for our blow-off valve. We have to do the CO2 for boost control. There's a lot going on here that we still have to figure out, so we're not by any means done, but we're close. And of course, when I say close, I mean close to hopefully being able to drive it for the first time. Actually getting this thing out on the track and getting it to perform, that's gonna be a whole nother ball game. But I suppose for now, the next stop is trying to get it on the dyno. So now's the time, go down in the comments, let me know what kind of power you think it's gonna make. It sounds fast. Is it gonna be fast, Fernando?
I think it will be fast.
It's gonna make some power.
All depends on the driver.
1500 or bust. Well, you had to do me dirty at the so you can have a different fused. I can't drive home. I got video of who was doing that. We can tell whose hands were.